Hello, and welcome to the latest BioLife talks on water and agriculture. How can EU and global policy and innovation ensure long-term water and food security? My name is Paul Adamson. I'm the chairman of Forum Europe. The discussion will take place in two parts, a panel discussion in the second part of today's discussion. But first of all, I'm delighted to be taking part in an interview with Meena Gully, who's the CEO of the Thirst Foundation. Welcome, Meena.
Thank you very much, Paul.
I have in front of me, Meena, quite a long CV about you. And maybe by way of introduction, then we should talk about why we even have these BioLife talks in the first place. We look at the EU's current approaches to water management, and which are most recently addressed in the context of the Green Deal and the EU's circular economy package, and to develop a conversation around the value and the role of water in Europe and around the globe. We hope to reflect on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which you're very familiar, which carry a number of targets for water action as we head towards 2030, and focus on tools, policy, and innovation that can be used to move the water scarcity agenda forward, which you are intimately involved. So before you started the Thirst Foundation, which I'll ask you about in a moment, first give us an idea of who Meena Gully was before the creation of the Thirst Foundation.
Yeah, maybe I'll start with where we are now, and then I'll go back to
Please.
how I got here. So for those of you that don't know, I'm Meena, and I'm currently in the midst of running 200 marathons this year in the lead up to the United Nations 2023 Summit on Water. It's the first time the United Nations has put together a summit on water in almost 50 years. And to be honest, it's well and truly time that it happens. On the weekend in the Netherlands, in The Hague, I completed marathon number 100. So by numbers, over halfway there now, but in effort, definitely have a huge mountain left to climb. So I've still got 100 to go. Most people, when they hear about me or when they meet me, instantly think I'm a natural runner. I came from a running background, and actually the opposite is true. When I was a kid, I never ran. I never participated in any sport at all. In fact, I was the last person picked for sports teams. So it's a bit of a weird place to be right now, where I'm using sport as a tool to drive change on water. My background is I'm also not an activist. I didn't ever think of myself as an advocate. I have a background in law, in finance. I ran an investment fund for a while. And through that, actually, I was introduced to the concept of water scarcity and water risk as a key driver for risk assessment and problems in the future, and a key driver for impact on shareholder revenue and on corporate revenue. And through that process of kind of understanding, I had a bit of a shock moment of, wow, I've done due diligence both as a lawyer and in my investment space for a very long period of time, almost all my life. I'm old now. And I thought for a long time I've never appreciated the importance of water that gets used in our supply chains. I think we all forget that water goes into everything we use, we buy, and we consume every single day, from the food we eat to the power that's going into the cameras we're speaking on today, to the clothes that you're wearing right now, smart shoes, suit, shirt. Just as an example, the water that went into what you're wearing today, just this one awesome outfit, took more water to make than all the water you drink before you're 40 years old.
Wow.
Just one outfit. And when you start thinking about that and the consequences and impact of that, not only in the clothing sector, but in the food and energy sectors, all of a sudden you realize that when we have no water, like we see across Europe over the summer, or we see in the United States right now, or indeed many of the places I've run, all of a sudden you start to think, what is the impact going to be on our supply chains? And therefore, what is the impact going to be on businesses and corporates, on their growth, and also their capacity to deliver dividends to shareholders in the long term? Not to mention to put the stuff we want on the shelves in the places we go to buy them.
So what is the Thirst Foundation? How is it structured? How is it organized? And what role do these 100 marathons so far to date play within that organization?
Yeah, so Thirst is an organization that we set up. Initially, we started doing education campaigns in China, fastest growing consumer economy in the world, to try to get young people to shift from just buying stuff to buying stuff in a smart way. So the idea was to reward companies that, using a so-called consumer vote, to reward companies that are doing the right thing. We were hugely successful, educated literally millions of kids across China. But as I was sitting around a conversation with people, and particularly water experts, I realized these numbers don't lie. By 2030, experts forecast that there's going to be a 40% gap between demand for water and the supply of water available. So it's great to educate the kids, but we don't actually have the time to wait for them to be in positions of power where they can start to make the decisions. We need to do more, and we need to do it faster. So we realized that we needed to start thinking out of the box. It's a huge global problem. For many, many years, nothing much has changed. There's been complete intraction in boardrooms and in the halls of power. And we realized we had to do something really big and bold to grab attention and to start to shift the dialogue, so that we move water from being a silo and something that's perceived as being a competition to conversations around climate change or deforestation or just child labor, and understand that water needs to be an integral part of these conversations. It needs to be mainstreamed across dialogues right around the world and across the board. And we need to put it onto the front page of the papers, because without water, as we just discussed, we literally have nothing. It is literally the foundation of everything. And so we came up with a concept that we would run, before it was literally running, but we would run these big out-of-the-box campaigns. And we realized we needed a hook. And we decided that one of the hooks could be to go to the places where there are water problems and where there are water solutions. But just going there doesn't grab anyone's attention. And so we came up with the concept that I would go by foot, and then it became, well, we need to do something more than that. Why don't you run? And I did have a conversation. I was in the room at the time when we were brainstorming this, and I did say, you know, guys, while you're all talking about this, I'm actually here, and I'm the one that's going to do this.
Right.
But we came up with the concept that I would run in some of the most water scarce places on the planet, and would show what it was like to live in these environments. So in 2016, I ran across, don't hold this against me, because this part is just going to sound really ridiculous. In 2016, I ran across 7 deserts on 7 continents in 7 weeks. So deserts like the Atacama in Chile and Antarctica, far, far down south, where I ran across these incredible white plains, realizing that there were literally billions of liters of water underneath my feet. And where it was so cold, the water in my bottles froze. It was so quiet, I could hear the sound of my own heart beating. And it was so incredible to learn from these climate scientists and hold ice core samples in my hands and realize the enormity of the problem that we were facing. And that was the start of this kind of these much bigger campaigns that went from me running on my own in these deserts to now we have people running together with us virtually, thousands and thousands of people in over 197 countries around the world.
So these marathons, impressive as they are in themselves, have been instrumental in raising awareness. They've been a very effective campaigning technique, if you can use that technique, to raise awareness.
Yes, there are 3 purposes of running. The first one is to bring awareness to the problem. The second is to show the urgency of the water crisis. I think it's easy for us to just think, oh, we'll kick the can down the road. But the purpose of going to these places is to show this is an urgent problem, it needs urgent action. And the third part is to drive that action from governments who have the capacity to set the agenda, action from companies who represent almost 90% of global freshwater use, either directly or indirectly, and action ultimately from all of us as individuals, because we have the capacity either as consumers or as voters to decide who we want to reward with our consumer spend or with the votes we cast in our ballots. And our goal is to awaken everybody to this crisis, but also to understand that we can be part of the solution. This is not someone else's problem to solve. It's our opportunity to be part of that solution.
Okay, well, I'm keen before the end of our chat to come to discuss with you, impress you on some of these solutions you're talking about here, but we'll come to that towards the end. In the meantime, I mean, if we were having this conversation not so long ago, a few years ago, climate change, we're saying climate change, what is climate change? Now people are aware of climate change, practically everybody on the planet for obvious reasons. But you talk about, when it comes to water, the need to mainstream the water aspect of the broader climate change debate. Is it a bit of a paradox that it's climate change is in its broadest manifestation, especially in terms of carbon emissions, is taking almost too much of policymakers and the general public's attention, to the detriment of the biodiversity debate, to the detriment certainly of water scarcity?
I think it's a mistake to think that it's all in competition, because
Right.
I think that the entire ecosystem is linked. Water does not come from a tap. Water comes from healthy ecosystems. And this is linked to biodiversity loss. So water is not something separate. It needs to be mainstreamed into these conversations around what does biodiversity mean. I ran, Iliad Kipchoge, who just set the world record again in Berlin on the weekend, has said it exactly, probably the best. He said to me, Mina, we were meeting Kaptagat Forest, and he was showing me around, and he said to me, this forest, I have watched this forest. I have watched it be absolutely decimated by by trees being chopped down. It's had a huge consequence on water. In fact, running across the streams that went from streams into dried riverbeds was the reason he started thinking, what is going on here? And realizing that deforestation has caused a massive challenge to the community and to the biodiversity, to the ecosystem up there, which is one of the big watersheds for some of the major rivers in Africa. And they started doing a replanting exercise, and he, through his foundation, has replanted thousands of trees up in Kaptagat Forest, and literally watched as the rivers that he initially had to jump over or had to ford his way across then became dry and have now got water flowing down them again. So water is not disconnected from biodiversity or from ecosystems. Water is biodiversity. Water is our ecosystems. When we have green forests, we have blue water. And when we have blue water, we have green forests. And on climate change, holding those ice core samples in my hands and speaking to the climate scientists about the consequences of climate change on water was incredibly an eye-opening experience for me, but also the truth about climate change is water change, and climate risk is water risk, because water is the place we're going to experience climate change first. Someone a long time ago said, if climate change is a shark, water is the teeth. It's the place we're going to get bitten first.
Right.
And right here in Europe, we've seen it. Over summer, you had huge droughts. Last year, we had huge floods.
Yeah.
These weather extremes, because of the impact of climate change, are only going to become more severe, not less severe. So I think that sitting hoping that we'll solve the climate change debate and everything is going to be okay is a falsity, because we're now in an environment where climate change is real, and the consequences of that are going to be absolutely massive, and they're going to be felt first and foremost in water challenges.
So you made this step change from simply educating, useful as it is, young children in schools, especially in China, starting with China, to engaging, make the step change, presumably engaging more with policymakers and politicians around the world. What kind of reception audience have you got from these political figures?
Yeah, so I think what's interesting for me is probably best summed in a quote that I was given by an Indigenous leader that I met in the middle of a desert. We ran across the Simpson Desert in Australia. I say that very flippantly. It was really incredibly challenging to run through knee-deep sand up and over all these sand dunes. The sand dunes are literally a roller coaster.
Wow.
It was 45 degrees at minimum. The temperature down the bottom between the dunes was far more than that. I got heat sickness. I was extremely ill and completely exhausted. So I say it flippantly, when we're running in the Simpson Desert, but it was pretty challenging. But we met an Indigenous leader, and he said to me, Mina, decisions would be better if our leaders could understand that things are different on the land.
Right.
He's absolutely right. We have a big challenge in the environmental space where leaders in the halls of power in government and sitting in boardrooms are so disconnected from their supply chains. Even us as consumers, when we're making decisions, are disconnected from our supply chains. And so one of my goals through this campaign is to lift up the stories of these people in those supply chains, the farmers, the people working in the factories, the factory owners, the people who are working to try to solve the problems with discharge of pollution. All of those stories need to be told and brought into the boardrooms and brought into these halls of power. And I have to tell you that the way in which we've been perceived and received in these places when we share these stories has been remarkable. I think the truth is...
And you were surprised by that?
I thought that I was really concerned that the level of intractability that we've seen over the last 50 years would be pervasive. And it would be a huge a bigger mountain to climb than running 200 marathons. But the reality is, for many people that have actually, because the water crisis is here, it's becoming increasingly obvious and the impact is becoming more and more severe. I think what we're seeing is more people in these halls of power understanding that this is an issue, but also understanding that it's not something separate. It's not another polar bear on an ice cap to be dealt with that has to be solved separate to the things that they're already doing. We've had conversations at a high policy level with various people in the finance sector, in all financiers. We've had conversations both in government and also in the private sector in companies with supply chain operators and heads of sustainability and CEOs. And I think there's increasingly a realization that water is absolutely integral to their future sustainability, not because of sustainability in the green sense, but because of the sustainability of the company in a corporate sense of ensuring its viability long term.
I think, is it fair to say that one of the issues that the broad climate change campaigners have to contend with, obviously you're part of that ecosystem, forgive the awful pun, is the fact that there's a sense of, maybe in the general public, a sense of helplessness. We've been maybe deaf to the warning signal and blind to the warning signal for so long, and now it's here, but almost too late, quote unquote. There's nothing that can be done. But you did say earlier that we can all be part of the solution, not just be part of the problem. And you seem quite optimistic and confident that solutions can be found. Can you give me some idea of why? First of all, why do you have this optimism? Maybe some examples of how things can or will or are getting better.
Yeah, so I think there are two parts to that. The first is, I do think it's easy. Look, I'm out there every day. I think it's easy to think, wow, this problem is so big and I'm just one person. What can I do?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very overwhelming place to be. And I have to tell you, I'm pretty much every day I'm there too, because I think, while I'm running all of these marathons, it is so hard. I'm not a good runner. I'm really slow. I find it extraordinarily challenging to go out there. I'm running, putting it in perspective, I run about 4 marathons a week. Some days, obviously today I'm not running, so some weeks it's 5 when I've got other meetings. So it's a huge volume of runner, especially like for me, I'm A, old, and B, not a runner. So I ask myself, I wake up every morning. This morning I woke up and I thought, gosh, I'm one person. What am I doing here?
Yeah.
And I think the truth is that when we work together with partners, whether they're in the private sector, the public sector, or whether they're just our community or our family, it's incredible what we can achieve. And someone said to me at the end of my last campaign, individually, you can make an impact, but together we can change the world. And I think that is something incredibly important to remember, that we may feel like we are a small cog in a very big wheel, but when we join with the other cogs and when we take small steps forward, we can deliver big change. I don't run a marathon by going out and running a marathon. I run a marathon by taking a very large number, about 45,000, very small individual steps, very slowly progressing towards my end goal, which is to finish the 42.2 kilometers for that day. And that 42 kilometers is another 42 kilometers in my march towards getting to 200. And I think that we need to remind ourselves big, bold, audacious goals can be achieved, whether it's running 200 marathons or solving the world water crisis. We can do anything we set our minds to. And I think that's the first thing I want to say to everybody. Right. Please don't think that things are too big or too bold or too audacious to be achieved.
Or that we've gone too far and it's irreparable. That also is a mindset as well.
Right. So the second part of this is looking at it and saying, well, there's no hope, because there's, where are the solutions? We've gone too far. It's a hopeless cause. We cannot think like that, because the next generation deserves more. It deserves more from us, and it deserves more from this planet that we're leaving behind us. And I think that we have a duty of care, not only to the environment, not only to the companies and the governments that we have around us today, but to the next generation that will be here tomorrow. It's our responsibility to make sure that we step up now. And people around the world are stepping up. I met farmers in Australia there's a guy, Andrew, who welcomed me to his farm and who showed me around. And he has been implementing a variety of different water saving technologies, both high tech with small water sensors and drones and all kinds of technology to help him figure out how to use water and how to water more efficiently, to much more low tech. Like, for example, he has big open channels of irrigation. And open channels traditionally, when they're just dug out of the ground, which is how they started, leak like crazy. And when they leak, you lose water and lose efficiency. But what he's doing is he's lined it with clay, and then he's got little drone robots that drift down these waterways and will find out where the leaks are, and he plugs the leaks. There are people I met in Turkey who are using regenerative agriculture in cotton production. And that means that, again, it's not a high-tech solution. It's a low-tech solution of the way you plant the crops and the way you either till or don't till the land.
Right.
People who are producing the cotton shirts and suits and things that you're wearing right now, that instead of just pouring water out into the waterways, they are deploying all kinds of techniques to recycle and reuse the water, whether it's UV, whether it's reverse osmosis. These technologies, they exist. We can scale them and we can deploy them. And if we don't, the consequences are dire. Again, in Turkey, I was running one day and we ran running along a trail and heard a motorbike zipping up behind us. And I thought, oh gosh, someone's going to tell us we're in trouble. And with a combination of Google Translate and sketching in an old school stick on the ground in the middle of the dirt, we realized that these guys are trying to warn us about, please don't run here, here, or here, and make sure you don't follow this trail, because there are big sinkholes which have opened up. And these sinkholes are where the surface of the land drops down. We're not talking 5 meters or 10 meters. It drops down a very considerable amount. And these are not small holes. They're, the size of half a football field. And this is caused by dramatic overuse of groundwater. So farmers for many years have been pulling groundwater out from the surface. And as a consequence, the entire surface of the ground has collapsed. This is shocking to see. It's shocking to see because it's the consequences of poor water management, of poor understanding of how to use water efficiently, poor choice of crops, a huge number of reasons why we've got there. And what's even more shocking is that they're still watering the crops at midday, spraying water high into the air when it's 35 degrees Celsius. And I look and I think, these are just, it's not even the high tech that I saw in Andrew's plants. It's not even, the medium tech that I've seen in different parts of the world. It's low tech behavior change that we could deploy so quickly and so easily. And I think the message about that is, it's not just about saying, I need to invest massive amounts in capital in order to solve this problem. It's also about saying we need easy wins. And when we all become part of that solution of easy wins, whether it's just as a consumer saying, I'm not going to water I'm going to shift to, I live in a place of drought and I'm going to change my garden to be more water-friendly more water-friendly plants. Or it might be, I'm not going to water my car on the driveway. Or it might be, I'm going to install water-saving shower heads, or I'm going to turn off the tap when I brush my teeth. It can be so simple. And I think we need to remember that sometimes the simple things can make a big difference.
You mentioned just now about working with partners, both private and public sector. Could you give me some examples of what kind of partners you do work with, and what your expectations are of these partnerships?
Yeah, so we work very closely with both governments. So we're working very closely with the two co-hosts of the UN 2023 summit. So it's the government of the Netherlands and the government of Tajikistan. And the reason why we are working with them is that I want to highlight the importance of leadership on this issue. Without leaders, it's hard to create and build momentum. And it's important that we have this conversation. Again, it's the first time in almost 50 years that the UN has put water as a key element of a global summit. So government is incredibly important. They have the capacity to set the agenda, and we need other governments around the world, particularly here in Europe, to step up and commit to mainstreaming water and commit to taking concrete action on water. The second is companies. As I said, companies represent almost 90% of global freshwater use, either directly or indirectly. So one of the companies that we're working with very closely is Bayer, who represent, through their value chain, almost 20% of global freshwater use, just one company.
Wow.
We came to buy actually because some of the farmers that I'd met had told me about these amazing seeds and innovative techniques to use water more efficiently. And so I approached them, got to know have a much better understanding of what they're doing. And it's a whole process of innovation through crop science,
Right.
where you can grow the same things that we always wanted and always needed, but just do it in a different way by using 30% less water, or whatever it is that you're going to do. So I think for me, because people often ask me, do you mean use less and buy less and do things less? And I say, no, it's about doing things differently from the way our parents and our grandparents did them before us. We have the ability, we have the technology, we have the innovation. What we need now is to deploy and scale it. And that only happens when we can raise awareness that we have a problem, we show the urgency, so therefore accelerate uptake, and then we actually drive the action that's needed to ensure that we can together solve this crisis. And the together piece requires civil society, it requires governments, and it requires companies to join together and to say, how do we unite in order to solve this problem, which if we don't, will lead us in a world where there isn't enough water for everyone forever. And that's a world I don't want to see. And it's a world I do not want to leave for the next generation.
Well, we're running out of time, unfortunately, but one final question then, Mina, if I may, and we should come back to this conversation on some other occasion. It's been fascinating. This may sound a bit like management speak, but given your background, I'm going to ask it anyway, before you started the Thirst Foundation. How do you set targets for your work? And how do you measure success without becoming too obviously beholden to matrix and criteria and stuff? But you don't just live day to day. You set yourself presumably some long-term goals, strategic goals. How do you set those goals, and how do you work out whether you've achieved them and to what extent you've achieved them?
Yeah, Paul, it's a really good question, because when I started this whole campaign in 2016, when I ran for the very first time, I asked everybody in the water sector, okay, what is the thing that we need to do to solve this problem? And how many people do I need to get to do this thing to solve this? Because I'm not in this to make, twiddle around the edges. I'm putting my body on the line every single day. And I'm not doing that because I want to do something small. My philosophy is go big or go home. This is a huge crisis. We have to solve it. I actually had a moment standing on the bank of the Orange River in Namibia, and I stood there, and Namibia, South Africa, the Orange River goes between the two countries. And I saw the impact that overuse of water was having on the river. And I thought to myself, this idea that I had to go back and put on my high-heeled shoes and my suit, this is not going to happen. I'm going to work to solve this water crisis for the rest of my life, no matter what it takes, no matter how long it takes, because this crisis is affecting all of us. It doesn't matter what investments I make, doesn't matter what I do in my corporate life. It pales into insignificance of the scale and enormity of this problem. And I think in all of our lives, we have these moments, if not me, then who? And if not now, then when? So from there, I did a whole lot of research. I spoke to over 60 different water experts around the world from across all sectors. And I said, what is the one thing? And it turns out, first of all, there's not one thing. And second of all, every company and every government has a different way of deploying and understanding what concrete action means and what it looks like. And I think that to create a one plan fits all, or to create a system where we say you all must do exactly the same thing, is a falsity, because every area, even local areas within inside countries, have different problems. You can get a country like Sri Lanka, which has drought in one area and flooding in another. There isn't a one size fits all scenario. And that makes measurement, and it makes KPIs, and it makes forecasting incredibly challenging, not only for them, but also for me to say, what does success look like? So I can tell you, for me, success looks like this: ending my 200th marathon on the steps of the United Nations, having created an environment where where all of the people who are standing there, all those decision makers who are about to go into the meeting for the first time, understand that failure is not an option, understand that concrete action is a necessity, not an optionality, and that concrete action will be determined by all of those people around the world that are now awake to the fact we have a water crisis. It's urgent and action needs to be taken. It's not my place to judge. I'm not the be all and end all of water. What I am doing is moving the world so that instead of water being on the sidelines, water is mainstream. Instead of water being forgotten about, it's put onto the agenda, not just now, but for the foreseeable future. And I think for me, to be able to get to a place where we are all saying to each other, it doesn't matter what you run in your lives, your household, your company, or your daily decisions, we all commit to run it blue and to put water front of mind. And if we get to that, when we get to that point, failures on options and no ifs, when we get to that point on the 22nd of March next year, World Water Day, then that will be the first step in success. And the second step will be in 2030 when we look around and we realize that all of the criteria of SDG 6 have been achieved, and our path the path forward is clear, without rocks, without mountains, without me falling over. But the literal path is clear to us seeing where we can create a water sustainable future for everyone on this planet.
Well, thank you so much, Meena. We have to leave it there. That terrific note, go home or go big or go home. I think it's a wonderful mantra to have. Meena will join us for this panel discussion in a moment. Do stay with us, all of you. A brief respite now. We'll be back in about a minute or two. Thank you very much. Welcome back to our panel discussion. It's my great pleasure to introduce our panelists. Meena Gully will join us at the end, but first of all, Petteri Talas, Secretary General of the World Meteorological Organization. Welcome, Professor Talas.
Hello from Geneva.
Thank you. Pedro Gallardo, who's the Vice President of COPA.
Good morning, everybody.
Welcome, Pedro. Matthias Berninger, who is Executive Vice President of Public Affairs, Science, Sustainability and HSE at Bayer AG. Welcome, Matthias.
Good morning from Leverkusen.
Shamizo Kumbirai, who is the SDG Water Investment Specialist at Global Water Partnership in Southern Africa. Welcome, Shamizo.
Thank you.
Let me quickly, for the benefit of our listeners, our viewers, introduce briefly who you are, in case they don't know exactly who you are. Going back to Shamizo, is a development professional and water engineer with skills and experience in soft areas such as multi-stakeholder engagement and communication, as well as hard areas such as bulk water supply, hydropower, engineering, and water resources management across Africa. She has private sector and intergovernmental experience. Petteri is the, as I said, Secretary General of the WMO since the 1st of January 2016, and he was appointed by the World Meteorological Congress in 2015 for a first 4-year term, and he is now serving his second 4-year term, which expires at the end of next year. Pedro Gallardo is a fourth-generation farmer in Andalusia, southern Spain. His farming activity has about 250 hectares, and the main crops are sunflower, rapeseed, wheat, durum wheat, and beans. Born in Puerto Real in Cadiz, he lives with his wife and 2 sons in the family farm, which he has managed since 1996. And he has always been involved in the organization ASAJA, Association of Young Farmers, where he's acquired also technical knowledge about agriculture. Matthias Benninger joined Bayer in January 2019, as I said earlier, its current position. He's very much involved in the company's global public affairs practice and for making Bayer's approach to sustainability a key pillar of its business strategy. In his role, he has strengthened Bayer's global public affairs practice and lead the development of a coherent global sustainability strategy. Joining us also, I'm not sure whether she's managed to get into the right location, the right studio, but Mina will also be joining us. There she is, Mina Gully. Welcome back, Mina. Any question I'd failed to ask you in the last half an hour, I would have the opportunity of asking you now. I'm not quite sure the preferred order, but maybe let me first of all go to Petteri and ask you, sir, maybe your reaction to if you had the opportunity to listen to our interview, our conversation just now. What is for you the most priority areas of action from the WMO's perspective in this area?
Yeah, so we are the UN Agency for Weather, Climate and Water, and water is very much the area through which we feel the impacts of climate change. In English-speaking countries, we are talking about global warming, and that's a little bit misleading term because the biggest impact so far, and also in the future, they are felt through water. And that means that we have started seeing growing amount of flooding problems in large parts of the world. We have already more humidity in the atmosphere because of 1.2 degrees warming that we have seen so far. And if we go to 2 degrees warming, that means that we will have even more humidity in the atmosphere. And that means that when it rains, it rains more. On the other hand, we have started seeing drought problems. At the moment, we have severe drought problems in Eastern Africa. We have seen very dry and very hot summers in China, in Europe, and also in western part of United States. And then, of course, this major flooding problem that Pakistan has been facing during the past months, where 1/3 of the country is flooded, and it's going to be a major disaster. There are 35 million people who are displaced, and that's a major thing. And in the future, I'm very much concerned of the food production capacity of the planet. It seems that we will see drier soils in many parts of the world where we are having a major production of food, and that's one of my major concerns. Then also we have seen speeding up of the melting of glaciers. We saw some of us physically in Tajikistan a couple of months ago to see what's happening there, and that's happening worldwide. We are losing freshwater resources, which are critical for many rivers worldwide, in Asia, in Europe, in Latin America and North America. and that's going to be one of the major threats for the welfare of mankind and also for agriculture. And this is also feeding in sea level rise, and we have seen doubling of the melting and sea level rise during the past 20 years, and unfortunately this game we have already lost. The melting of glaciers and sea level rise will continue for the coming hundreds of years, even thousands of years, and there are major threats related to melting of Antarctic glacier. That's what we just learned from most recent glaciology conference. So there's a very good reason to keep climate change as the highest priority of mankind. At the moment, this war in Ukraine is shadowing things, but then having major negative impacts worldwide. But in the long run, climate change remains to be the #1 challenge.
You, Pedro, as a working farmer on the land, literally on the land, what has been your experience in the 25 years or so you've been running the family farm, and what is the current situation?
It's a very good question, Paul. Thank you for the question. I was following the Mina interview before, and I totally agree with her in many of the issue that she said. For us, for the farmers, water is essential. It's totally agree that the climate change is linked to the water, and especially in areas like Spain, in the south of Spain, where we have areas like desertification. We know that where we have water, we have productivity agriculture. We have more employees than in other areas. We have in Spain village towns in the countryside that are totally abandoned because we don't have water. Meanwhile, where we have water, we have a productivity agriculture, and we still have people living in the towns, in the village. So for us, we are also trying that many times. Farmers are accused to waste more water than we need. We said the water is not in my farm. The water is in the product that you have in your fridge. There is the water, and we want to be the most sustainable in the world, because this is our soil. And this soil we want to give to our next generation that I received from my grandfather, my father, etc. So because of that, we want to continue being more sustainability, to reducing water. But for that, we need innovation. And innovation, we think, is the key of the future. We can take water like in Spain from the sea, salted water, and use in the irrigation in the agriculture in Spain. But for that, we need budget, we need money, and of course, we need innovation applied to the agriculture. So what we can do is to let many water go to the river, to the sea, and then this water is not useful. We need to have a real program to have water, because this is the way to produce in more sustainable way.
Okay, thank you, Pedro. You went frozen for a while. I wasn't sure if you finished. Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to Matthias. You heard Matthias in the interview with Mina that a comment about the huge proportion of water consumption taken up by private sector companies like yours. So what is your current role, and what is your strategy as Bayer to tackle this issue?
First of all, I've talked to Mina a lot, but it's always a great pleasure to kind of just listen in. So thank you, Mina, for I think a great 30-minute conversation. And we had an awesome week last week in Berlin, where we talked to some of those policymakers, and I think the strategy works in terms of getting more attention to the 2022 high-level conference on water. What is our role? Mina talked about our value chain, and I can pick the apple up where Pedro has basically thrown it in the conversation. When you look at the value chain, you look at everything from cradle to cradle. So we are very much in the cotton production, and thus the water that is used for our textiles, the textiles we wear, is somehow involved in our value chain. We are not consuming every drop of it, but just by virtue of supporting cotton farmers, we are part of that value chain. And I looked at a lot of sustainability-related risks for Bayer, and of course the European Union, with all of the regulation on materiality assessments, is now mandating companies to do that. And when I looked at water, I realized everything else doesn't really matter. Literally half of our business depends on this very simple ingredient of water, and the other half at least partially depends on it. And there is, I think, no lack of understanding that is so, but then companies don't translate that necessarily in how they deal with that risk. And that is, I think, the big shift we need to get to. People need to start to act on water. And let me start with a simple thing. And I followed the chat before we started this conversation. And Pedro was talking about, well, I don't have a great connection on my farm to kind of participate in this. And this is one of the problems, because we need to enable farmers to fully understand both their current situation when it comes to soil moisture, but also how the weather is evolving. We need to be much better globally in predicting both flooding and droughts in order to enable growers to make choices that they otherwise just make based on experience. But the experience doesn't help, because the climate is changing faster than the knowledge that is basically transferred from one generation of farmers, often in one family, to the next. So, and Petri, I think you can talk more about that later, but when WMO said one of the things we need is a global water information system for every country in the world to understand how their water situation is changing over time, and to be able to predict floodings like what we've seen in Germany last year, or what we see in Pakistan at a much larger scale just this year, is one of those crucial things we need to work on. And Bayer, with our engagement in digital agriculture, can contribute to fine-tuning these kind of forecasting systems. So that would be one thing we need to collectively work on. And as silly as that sounds, but if we were only able at the UN high-level conference on water to get an agreement of countries to establish such a global water information system, we would have made tremendous progress on tackling the water crisis.
Okay, thank you very much, Matthias. Well, certainly we'll come back to that and the culmination of all this at next spring's UN conference. I turn now to you, Shami. So, first of all, maybe for the benefit of all of us watching you, give us a brief description of what the Global Water Partnership is all about, and what is your contribution to this issue.
Thank you very much. So yes, a bit about Global Water Partnership. We're an intergovernmental organization that was established in 1996, particularly with the aim to help support countries with regards to implementing more equitable and sustainable water resources management. And one of the key things that we have been driving, and I think it links very nicely with what Mina has been talking about around mainstreaming water, is really looking at integrated approaches when it comes to water resources management. So we've been driving processes such as integrated water resources management, as well as the adoption of nexus approaches around the water, energy, and food sectors, to really see how we can sort of break some of the siloed approaches across sectors, and really at the policy level look to support some of those individual actions that people such as Mina are taking to really, at a broader level, see that change that's really needed to support water resources management at the country level, as well as at the regional level as well. So yeah, that's the main focus that we've been looking at. So Mina's already sort of spoken to this need for this integrated approach. I think one of the other instances that we're seeing with regards to the state of water investments in Africa is that there is very low political will when it comes to investing in water and sanitation on the continent. So one of the major drivers that we're also sort of looking to implement as GWP on the continent is really trying to drive this political will towards strengthening investments into water, given that water is largely a government funded and led in initiative at the country level, it's very pertinent that we get governments on board. And it's also increasingly important that we have substantiated facts and arguments to support this political will and drive towards the investments in water. And one of the initiatives that we've been taking on is to establish a water investment scorecard that'll help to not only sort of enhance mutual accountability towards results in water investments, but really look to be that political driver towards ensuring commitment from high-level leadership to really drive the water agenda and get us the investments that we require to meet the SDG 6 goals on the continent. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much, Anisa. I have many questions for all of the four panelists who've spoken so far, but before I go back to them, I want to invite Mina. Do you want to react, Mina, at all to anything you've heard from Petteri, Pedro, Shamila, and Matthias?
No, I think, Paul, this just listening to everything that the panel has said here really reiterates some of the things that all of the things that I've seen in the field. You know, I've literally met thousands of people on my journeys, not only this year when I'm running 200 marathons, but also in all of the previous runs that I've done down rivers and across deserts and, you know, in some pretty remote places of the world. And every farmer reiterates what Pedro has said. Every scientist has reiterated what Petteri says about, you know, the impact of climate change and the connection between climate and water. And I think that the time has come, as Matthias has said, and also Shamisa has said, for us to start listening, for people in positions of authority, decision makers, to start listening to the scientists, listening to the farmers, listening to the innovators, whether it's innovation in technology like Matthias and his team, or whether it's innovation in different ways of thinking like Shamiso is talking about. I think that it's very easy for us to sit back and watch the bus leave the station and say we're quite happy in our own homes, we don't need to leave. But the truth is, we need to change. We need the world to change if we're going to solve this global water crisis. So I think that the time has come when we need to move from talk to action, and we need to move from talk to listen. So I think that, you know, if there's one thing that comes out of this panel, I really hope everybody that's watching is truly listening to the messages, not just from me, but from the experts that are sitting here in front of us right now, and really listening and integrating and understanding that we too can be part of the solution, and they too, you too, can be part of really solving this global water crisis. Because in the lead up to the 2023 summit, that's what we're going to need. We're going to need listening and action and commitments and a really meaningful movement towards this time, because otherwise we run the risk that 2023, this big UN panel, this big UN conversation will be just another talking opportunity, and that cannot happen, because as we talked about, failure is not an option, and that is failure.
Right. Failure is not an option. Another good mantra from Mina. I'm going to go back to the panel in 1 second, but before I do, remind the audience out there, if you, as Mina says, please listen, but also please ask questions. If you have any questions to ask, put them in the chat, and I will do my very best to make sure that the panel sees them and addresses them. I'm going to go back to all of you now in turn, and I'm taking maybe my cue from Mina. Let's make sure this conversation is not an abstract conversation. Let's talk about how, I'm very keen to know from all of you how your work is changing as the seriousness of the situation becomes more and more apparent, and how optimistic, if you are optimistic at all, you are about how change can be affected and through innovations and so on and so on. Let me first then go back to you, Petteri, if I may. WMO is not just a tracking organization. It's not just a forecasting organization, although that is obviously its core competence. I just wonder, given the seriousness of the broad climate change issues and the water source shortages we've been discussing all this morning, do you see, in your term as the boss of the WMO, a change in the almost the mandate and the way you go about your work, in not just forecasting movements, but also alerting and being to be very direct, being a bit more political in using the research that you have at your fingertips?
Yeah, so we have paid very much attention to communication of the facts, and that's what we are very much doing. We are the host agency of IPCC. I was just opening the IPCC plenary this morning, and we are also such an agent inside the UN family, and we are working very closely together with Secretary General Guterres, who sees climate change as his highest priority. We just had this high-level week in New York last week, and it was also clear last week that the heads of state and the UN heads see climate change as a major threat for the welfare of mankind, and we are strengthening these messages by bringing the facts on the table. And these facts, they are less comfortable because we are moving in the wrong direction, and we are just heading towards COP27 in Sharm el Sheikh in coming weeks, and we have been preparing major early warning service initiative, which seems to have lots of support by development agencies and donor countries, and there we aim at improving the water management and also related forecasting. There's a need to invest in basic observing systems of meteorology and hydrology, and then we have to strengthen the service capabilities of countries. Only half of our member countries have proper early warning services in place, and there are major gaps in flood forecasting and drought forecasting skills of the countries. There's clearly a need to improve the system, and even in countries like Germany, as we saw a year ago, there are challenges. So there were even casualties in Germany because of poor cooperation between the meteorological and hydrological agencies and related safety authorities. And there seems to be strong support for such an initiative cooking for the COP27, and we will continue the discussion also at the UN Water Conference in March in New York. But the COP27 is going to be a game changer, and so far we get very strong support for that. So besides climate mitigation, which is of course very critical thing, we have to pay attention to climate adaptation, because the negative trend in climate will continue for the coming decades anyhow, and the sea level rise and melting of glaciers, unfortunately, even coming hundreds of or even thousands of years.
Thank you, Petteri. Turning to you, Pedro, again, you said earlier about the crucial need for innovation in farming, but doesn't that sort of beg the question about how affordable this innovation is to a farmer, how accessible it is, how the mindset of farmers to be open to new ways of farming? Is that still an issue, or do you think now there's a whole new generation, like people like yourself, who are fully aware of what the stakes are and are very open to innovation and are prepared to do their part in investing in this innovation?
Thank you, Paul. I think just this isn't right. Next generation comes more professional with different ways to about the farming, precision farming, because innovation is a part of the solution. But of course, we need to adapt our farmers for the new requests from the society. But of course, we have an example where farmers are participating, are collaboration. For example, we have a project in Belgium that is a RESO, that is to reduce the risk of pollution in the water, because this project, for example, is voluntary for the farmer to clean where exactly the sprayer machine in the right way, and also to construct walls near the well to reduce the contamination. We have example, for example, in Portugal, where 20 different rivers or lakes are connected to have a better process. This is the Milky project. So in general, farmers want to have a part of the solution. But in another way, right now, we have the problem of how to access to the water, and also the farm to fork strategy from the Commission. I said at the beginning, we need to be sustainable agriculture. We need to feed the world. The world is going to increase the population, especially in Africa. Africa right now has 1,200,000 people, and Africa expect to increase the population 3 times, near 4.5 billion persons, said United Nations at the end of the century. So we need to be solidarity with Africa, and we need to produce not only for Europe, we need to produce for Africa. And because of that, we need to be sustainable with the water. We need in Spain, for example, we have highway for the cars. We have a highway for fast trains. Why we don't have highway for the water? From the north to the south, because this water in the north is going to the sea without any solution. So and we don't want all the water. We need just the right water, because water right now is an important input cost in our farm. For water, we need electricity. Electricity is a 3 times price higher than 1 year before. So we need to pump the water. We need to be the most sustainable in the water as we can do, because it's expensive for us to pump the water. So this is the solution of part of the problem. But of course, for that, we need that administration, public and private, put the money. We have the recovery budget of the European Union, and we need this part of the budget of the money came to the farmers, because we need to make better sustainable irrigation.
Thank you, Pedro. I have more questions as well, but I'll come back in a second. Turn to you again, Matthias. So innovation comes from companies like yours, Bayer. How, again, I'm trying to work out how hopeful the future is. So how optimistic are you from your company's perspective that the innovation that you and Pedro and others have been speaking of will be there to make it's a significant contribution to this?
I like to look at bright spots. Whenever I look at these daunting challenges, I like to look at innovation that worked. And one example is that today you can select the right seeds, the right genetic material at a pace that is unprecedented and also at a very low cost. And that led to selecting seeds in the cotton space, for example, that need roughly 30% less water than the seeds that were used 20 years ago. And when you irrigate, that of course makes a huge difference. So breeding for drought-tolerant seeds is one of the things I obsess a lot about. Let's look at rice production in Southern Europe. Of course, hugely dependent on water. What if we were transforming the global rice production from the current paddy rice mantra to a dry-seeded, potentially in some areas even perennial kind of rice crop production? That would reduce the water needs dramatically. It would allow to keep livelihoods for rice farmers and keep farmers doing what they have done for generations, but also would secure one of the major food sources. And it would reduce the methane emissions that come with rice production and thus aggravating climate change. So it's kind of a Swiss Army knife innovation that has lots of benefits. So dry-seeded rice. Then let's look at corn. Can we select corn seeds which deeper root systems that at the same time capture more carbon in the soil and need less water and are more drought tolerant? So these are examples of like the seed selection. I also think we need to talk about what the EU agriculture ministers talked about 2 weekends ago, and by the way, also agreed with a broad majority. The European Union needs to double down on allowing new breeding technologies. These new breeding technologies will allow us to kind of keep pace with the speed of climate change. So to really help to adjust our plants to be more climate resilient. And one of the innovations that's possible with gene editing, for example, is to modify plants in a way that allows to adjust kind of the growth of the plant to whether there's a lot of water in 1 year or not very much water in another year. So to make them more adaptable to the variability of water. All of this is possible. A lot of this is already implemented in other parts of the world. but it requires a level of excitement that I sometimes miss in Europe. I'm, by the way, very glad that these kind of technologies are more and more welcomed in Africa. Because for the longest time, Africa has just been following the European skepticism when it came to technology. That is over, partially because the challenges Africa faces are so big. And the other thing I want to say is that in working with smallholder farmers in Africa, I see them to be super innovative. We have worked with 100,000 smallholders in Kenya, and just by adopting basic digital technology, the yield increased by a factor of 4. That is a yield increase I think Pedro can only dream of. Like the most modern farmers in the world cannot get to such a yield increase. So there is a lot possible. And if we reduce the water needs of agriculture by 10, 15, 20%, we would already avoid a lot of disasters in the next 10 years. So I'm quite optimistic that that is possible, but innovation needs to be welcomed. Europe needs to be open-armed for this kind of innovation. And I have to say, I'm very proud of the agriculture minister's decision to do exactly that and to ask the Commission to speed things up.
Okay, thank you, Matthias. I'm going to turn back to Shamizo. You said earlier, Shamizo, that there was an urgent need to mainstream the water issue in the broader climate change debate, obviously. And you talked about this, you breaking down this silos, this nexus. That sounds very intriguing. I didn't have time maybe to ask you before, but now I will ask you. How is that working in practice, the breaking down of these silos? You unmute, somebody could unmute Shamizo. There you go. Now you're muted again. There you are. Now you're back on.
Okay, perfect. Thanks very much. Before I speak to the water, energy, food nexus, I may sort of want to just sort of speak to the optimism question that you'd asked to the rest of the panelists before, because I think it's very important for us to sort of really approach this with a level of realism in terms of where we're currently sitting. So Pedro has already sort of given some of the statistics with regard to the population on the African continent and the growing population that's going to also then take place in the coming years. With that in mind, it's important to note that to this day, at least 300 million people on the continent are still without access to safe and clean drinking water. And over 700 million of those have not got access to decent sanitation. The World Bank has recently reported that at least $30 billion would be required to be invested into Africa yearly for us to meet the SDG 6 target on water and sanitation. But we're actually only sort of investing a third of what's required into water on the continent. So the situation is quite dire, and we really do require some very proactive changes to take place for us to meet some of these requirements. And I think, as Mina has suggested, this 2023 UN Water Conference will really be critical in helping to drive that agenda, because we really need accelerated approaches to get us to some of the solutions that we need. When I speak to the water, energy, food nexus, I can talk specifically to some of the work that we're doing through support from the European Union within the Southern African region. So we're currently undertaking a project that's been running since about 2017 around fostering water, energy, and food nexus security dialogues. And this has really taken on a stepped approach to really see what the current status is with regards to water, energy, and food sectoral integration at both the regional level within the Southern African Development Community, as well as at the national level for all the member states as well. And what we're finding is that policy is not integrated. Silos still exist across the sectors. And there would be greater benefit in terms of integrating this approach, because water is a sector that has, historically struggled to gain the level of investments compared to agriculture and energy. So we really see this as being one of the key approaches that would help to bolster investments into water by looking at more integrated approaches. So we've already sort of spoken to, or you've already sort of mentioned how issues around hydropower may be seen as a helpful a benefit towards both the energy sector, but also looking to see how, we can use this to drive the water agenda, to gather and store necessary water that would be required for agricultural purposes or industrial purposes that would be required. So this is the kind of approach that the WEF Nexus is looking to take on. It's really looking to see how we can sort of manage some of the interplay between these various sectors to see how we can optimize the use of these resources at the regional level as well as at the national level.
Thank you, Shamizo. Mina, do you want to come in maybe to respond or also to react to Shamizo's point? You have Matthias saying that the openness and the impressive innovation being shown by many African farmers, but at the same time, as Shamizo points out, this issue of access to clean water, access to sanitation is a harsh reality at the same time.
Yeah, so I think I just want to anchor us around something that Petteri said, which is the facts are less comfortable because we're moving in the wrong direction. I think we need to also understand that this failure to listen because the facts are uncomfortable is putting us in a place where we have some major challenges. The glaciers are melting. I know because I've seen them. Matthias has seen them. Petteri has seen them. We have a problem downstream where rivers and lakes are literally drying up. I know because I ran through them. Like I've run between the ships and boats of the Aral Sea, these massive, great hulking carcasses of old shipping boats that 30 years ago were floating in one of the biggest inland oceans in the world, where people for 30 years refused to listen to the professionals and the experts like Petteri and like others who were telling them, if you continue to use water in this way, these lakes and these rivers will dry up. And these aren't just issues around management of water. As Shamizo has pointed out, this is not just about numbers on a page. These are real stories of real people in real places, kids literally digging with their hands in the ground to try to find water to drink, people who don't have access to water waiting at home for water to be delivered on the backs of trucks, not only in Africa, but in 100 cities around France. These are not just isolated problems, and they're not just numbers on a page. They're real problems in real places all across the world. And we need to listen to the experts when they tell us that these numbers are real, these stories are real, and the problem is bigger than we can imagine. And I think that as we spoke about when we were speaking bilaterally in the interview, this can be a really difficult moment because discomfort is not a place most of us like to be. I don't like it. Most of us don't like it. But discomfort is a place we need to be if we're actually going to solve this problem. I know what it is to be in positions of discomfort because I literally live it every day. This is one of the hardest things I've done in my life, to run 200 marathons, to try to change the world. This is hard. But I think the message that we need to give people is discomfort is okay because we can do hard things. It's possible for all of us to step up and actually create and deliver change. And the great thing about water is that many of the solutions for us to deliver that change are there. As Matthias talked about, the solutions in the crop sciences space, in the agriculture space, whether it's digital innovation or it's technology innovation or it's behavior change innovation, it was genetic innovation. These solutions exist. We just need to make the choice to take them on. And I think for me, that is a really critical point of this whole conversation, which is the future is not dim. The future is bright if we choose to turn the light on. But that decision to turn the light on and to move towards it and to actually listen to what all these uncomfortable facts and figures are, to be prepared to be in those positions of some discomfort in order to get to this end solution, that's a choice we have to make. And I really hope that, I don't hope because hope is not an option. In this environment, the stakes are so high we can't hope. We need to work together to ensure that those choices are made now in advance of this UN summit, that we listen to the experts, we deploy the solutions, we understand that we can be a factor in generating and delivering those solutions by 2023 summit. No matter who we are, no matter where we are from, that is a choice to put water front of our minds.
Thank you, Mina. Just to remind the audience that now's a good opportunity to put your questions in the chat if you have any questions for our panel. I'll go back to you, Petteri, if I may. You referenced COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in November. Is it from your point of view, is it seen as maybe it's not quite the right phrase, a staging post to the big UN water summit in March? You said that you were question one. Question two, will the issue of water get lost in the broader issues just to be discussed at COP27? And as you just said, and Mina picked up on it, all these uncomfortable facts that you are now regularly putting out there because you have no choice but to do so. And people have difficulty maybe listening because they are uncomfortable. Do you see any optimism, trying to go back to this optimism theme, that the policymakers, despite their discomfort, are starting to pay attention?
Yeah, so I'm, despite of these facts, I'm slightly optimistic, and this optimism is coming from the fact that we have started seeing more interesting solutions, and what has happened during the past 10 years. First, the governments have realized that this is a major issue, and we have been able to develop technological solutions to be successful in climate mitigation. For example, solar and wind energy, they are now the most profitable sources of energy, even more profitable than fossil ones. And what we just heard from Matthias, what kind of innovations they have to support the global food production capacity. That's also very, very encouraging. And during the past 15 years, 32 countries have already reduced their emissions, and at the same time, their economies have been growing. So there are also positive things happening. And the IPCC report in 2014 was estimating that we could see 3 to 5 degrees warming by the end of this century, and now we are talking about 2.5 to 3 degrees range. So something has happened, but we need to continue pushing. And also this adaptation is very important. And what Matthias just said, we have growing amount of means for adaptation. And besides climate mitigation, we should also pay attention to population growth, which means demand of resources and victims of climate change, and also more consumers who demand water resources and also fossil fuel resources. And then one agriculture-related issue is the fact that more than 70% of the land, farmland that we have in place is used for feeding cattle, and that's not the smartest way of using farmland. And again, it's related to the water problem, and it's related to the hunger problem. So we have also means to tackle these issues. And to conclude, I would say that I'm slightly optimistic, and in Sharm el-Sheikh we expect to see steps forward in improvement of the early warning services, which is going to be important component for adaptation, and their water flooding and drought and water management issues will be one of the core issues. That's what seems to be the tone of United Nations, and that's also very much the tone of government of Egypt. So also in that sense, I'm slightly optimistic.
Okay, well, it's good to hear, Petteri. Thank you. Turning back to you, Matthias, since Pedro has had to drop out of this conversation, I think because of technical issues, let me ask you also, therefore, a kind of food-related question. We're here to talk about water today, obviously, but there's also the issue of food security on the back of especially a more heightened awareness on the back of the war raging still in Ukraine. Is that something which is in the discussion on water a useful thing to have? We would obviously we prefer not to have the war in Ukraine. Obviously, we prefer not to have issues about food security, but as it helped focus focus people's mind on the issue of water scarcity as well in the broader discussion about food security?
I mean, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has aggravated a food crisis that was already in the making. So ever since 2019, we see an increasing number of people basically going to bed hungry. So there has been, unfortunately, a trend that is exactly the opposite of what we wanted to promise in the SDGs. And Putin has aggravated that, and he's also using hunger as a weapon, as a tool to achieve his political goals. The big, however, is the water crisis and what climate change is doing to agriculture is a much more relevant factor in the food crisis. And currently, the two biggest challenges for growers around the world are water. Those who extract water from the ground up need energy for it, often electricity. That's getting more expensive. And fertilizers, which are currently responsible for half of the agricultural output in the world, or for the feeding of 4 billion people. And we see a massive reduction of fertilizer output, which will lead to, I believe, a major challenge for our food systems next year. So food and water and energy, like Shamiso has shared, they are all the same thing. We are looking at the same thing from different vantage points here. And solving for the water crisis means we increase food security. And solving doesn't just mean to think about irrigation. Petteri talked about the whole challenge of the water intensity and land intensity of meat production. I think we all need to be open to new forms of protein consumption, be it plant-based, be it proteins that come through like cell-cultured meat and so on. So I feel we are on a good way here to be open for innovation, also in the space of alternative meats. But yeah, I mean, the ultimate consequence of the water crisis is a hunger crisis. The flood in Pakistan has taken away the livelihood, the tools for millions of farmers to produce food in Pakistan. And consequently, we need to think about how to get that food there short term and how to help those rural communities to get back in a more productive place and to have a perspective. If there's one thing that wakes me up at night, it's the global hunger crisis coming.
Okay, thank you, Matthias.
It keeps me up, to be honest.
Right. Shamiso, I want to come back to you and ask you quite a direct question. From your perspective, is there still a lack of appreciation by the so-called more developed world about the situation in regions like your own and the rest of Africa, for example, that despite the fine talk, as I say, the more developed world doesn't really appreciate the situation, since you referenced access to clean water, issues about sanitation, and it's all very well to talk about new technologies, innovation, where the basic needs of the population of Africa, for example, are not being met. Is there still that situation, or that a caricature of the past?
Thanks very much for that, Paul. I think the situation is well understood within the developing world. Where I think more could be done would be in encouraging this political commitment. So really speaking at that political high-level level to get that leadership support and drive the resources that are going into water to adequate use when it comes to the investments that are being allocated. Already in terms of the official donor assistance that we're getting by way of water and sanitation, this is contributing quite significantly to the progress that's being made in developing nations, right? So I definitely think that should not be discounted. But I think more should be done to really urge leadership in terms of really making the best use of the resources that are provided for optimal benefits towards all the citizens of the continent.
Okay, thank you, Shamisa. Do you want to respond at all, Mina, at this point?
I think
you
just on Shamiso's comments, I also think it's really important that we look at things differently and that we encourage and examine opportunities for additional capital flows that can potentially come into this space. I know I've spoken to a huge number of small to medium-sized enterprises, some of the social enterprises that are being set up across the African continent, which comes back to Matthias's comment too about the potential and innovation that exists in Africa. And I think that figuring out how to innovate at a very commercial sense, that in a way that will drive more capital into the kinds of investments that are needed to provide clean water and sanitation to people across Africa, that will drive the kind of investment into the types of technology that Pedro was talking about when he said we need capital and we need innovation. I think we need to find a way not only to have conversations with the companies and the experts, but also with the capital providers, and those are the banks and the financial institutions, small, medium, and large. Microfinance has a role to play, mid-level finance, and commercial financing. And we've got to find a better way of figuring out how to drive more capital flows into the water space. That is not easy, but it is definitely something that I think needs to be done. Second reflection, just on Matthias's comments about the war on Ukraine, and I know, Paul, you asked very specifically about this. I think one of the things that the war has done is it's focused us in a way we hadn't before on what life looks like when we don't have energy, or we don't have food, or we don't have the things that we have traditionally taken for granted. And of course, one of those is water. You know, right across the newspapers and the news cycle around Europe right now, it's how are we going to survive a winter when we don't have access to heating? These are things that we take for granted. Places like Africa and continents where you don't have access to water, you don't have access to heating, you don't have access to these kinds of luxuries. I think that for the first time, we're actually being forced to confront that. I know it's also happening in the US, where lack of supplies of water are also causing brownouts and pressure on the electricity grid. So these are things I think that for the first time in the water sector, we also have an opportunity to start to leverage this new conversation, to move it in different directions, and to start trying to generate some conversation around what it means for change. And I think the third and last thing I wanted to say is the big theme about all of this is water is not someone else's problem. Water is our problem too. And we may all just be individuals. Everybody watching this is an individual in their own right, but we can make a change that will require some discomfort, but we can do these hard things. We can particularly do them when we work together. And I think the conversations like this, where we bring together people from all different specters and audiences, where we actually start to open up about water, I think are critically important. I said in our conversation, individually, you can make an impact, but when we work together, we can change the world. And I think that the message that I've heard from every single one of us here on this panel, but also from everyone I've met along the way, is that really doesn't matter what you run in your lives, whether you're a water expert like Petteri, whether you're an innovator in the business space like Matthias and the team at Bayer, whether you're Shamiso and working at a policy level, or Paul, whether it's you working at a level to try to instigate these conversations and lift the profile of water. The reality is, companies, households, daily decisions, what we need to do is we need to incorporate water, we need to run blue, and we need to put water front of mind, no matter who we are, no matter what we do, and no matter where we are.
Okay, I think we should leave it at that point. Mina, thank you so much. I think all of us are very cognizant of the scale of the challenge. We're not trying to sugarcoat or be in denial about the serious issues before us, but it's also important, I think all the panel would agree, and certainly Mina is a living incarnation of that. We have to remain positive. We have to realize that we have a role to play, both at the individual level and at the collective level, to improve the situation going forward. It remains me something to thank all of you for making the time available today. You're all extremely busy people, so I appreciate your time, especially coming from different time zones, both west and more east. Thank you so much, and we'll see you, all of you, hopefully at the next Biotech Talk. Bye-bye.